So today I want to share with you an explosive report written by a Red Princeling. In a 6,000-word essay, he offers a psychological profile of Xi Jinping and an insider's view of Xi's complicated relationship with the princeling class. The author remained anonymous, and so he passed the report to a Chinese YouTuber to release. And this isn't just coming from an outside observer. The writer himself is an insider, and he says he knows this elite group inside out, their worldviews, their values, how they behave, what they think. He said very few people on the outside truly understand what defines these people. And that's why he felt compelled to speak out. And I find his analysis extremely insightful. And if you take a step back and look at how China's political situation has shifted in the past year, it all starts to make sense once you understand Xi Jinping's character. Okay, so the essay begins with a simple idea. He said, under communism, there is a built-in reverse elimination mechanism. The more normal or decent someone is, the quicker they are pushed out. And when you add in all the so-called CCP characteristics, the system becomes not just corrupt, but downright evil. And to get to the top of the CCP, you don't need to be good. You need to be bad. And that alone shows just how deeply the party's selection system goes against human nature and against all reason. So Xi Jinping, he says, is the perfect product of this twisted system. But here's the thing. Xi Jinping is not bad in the usual sense. His flaw isn't that he's scheming or he's sinister, although I think he is. But that's just the view of this author, this Princeling, okay? So the author said that his badness comes from being both slow-witted and stubborn. If he were just dumb, he might make mistakes, but at least he could learn. He might even listen to advices. But because he's also incredibly stubborn, once he picks a direction, even the wrong ones, he just keeps going, no matter how much damage it causes. And that's why he can be totally destructive. And the author breaks down Xi's core personality flaws into 4 words: inferiority or insecurity, cowardice, hypersensitivity, and stubbornness. Put them all together, and you get the twisted, contradictory character of Emperor Xi. Now you might wonder what do you mean by inferiority? Could someone like Xi, born into a powerful revolutionary family with a seemingly smooth political career, possibly feel inferior or insecure? The Red Princelings, or the second-generation elites, form a very special class in China. And within that group, there's a hierarchy. So you see their parents join the revolution at different points in time. Some fought with the Red Army in the early days. Some joined during the war against Japan. Others during the Civil War leading up to 1949. But only those whose parents were in the Red Army from the beginning are considered true princelings. Their families are seen as the founding bloodline of the regime. In the eyes of the Red elite, they are the real masters of China, the true ruling class. Everyone else is measured by how much of that elite bloodline they carry. Now, we all know the CCP system is a ruthless meat grinder. It chews up humanity and spits out cruelty. Rising through the party ranks is basically a contest to see who can be the most cutthroat. But the princelings, they don't have to play that rule. I mean, they don't have to play that game. They float above the system. As individuals, they could get cushy jobs through family connections. That let them keep some trace of human decency, according to this author, because they never had to go through the full political grinder. But that also meant they didn't usually rise too far, which is why a lot of them chose to go into the military instead. In the early days, the military was relatively straightforward. If you had the right family name, you could advance quickly. When Deng Xiaoping came to power, another path opened up. business. Many princelings jumped at the chance. They used their networks to build personal empires or took quiet positions in associations and think tanks, carefully pulling strings from behind the scenes. But the goal was always the same: stay out of the CCP's meat grinder, avoid the internal bloodbath of party politics. Very few princelings went into politics, and even fewer climbed high. Why? Because doing that meant you had to be bad, really bad, and you had to want it. So the smart ones went into the military or business. The dumb ones, according to the author, went into politics. All right, so Xi didn't rise through being cunning or ruthless. He rose through sheer mediocrity. And let's be blunt, dull-wittedness. That's what the author claimed. He wasn't sharp enough for business, not strategic enough for the military. The only path left for him was politics. And according to the author, the princeling class developed a very distinct personality. They tend to be confident, sometimes arrogant, and they carry themselves with pride. Groveling and flattery, that's not even in their vocabulary. So in theory, this should be the last group in China to suffer from feelings of inferiority. But inside that world, there is still a pecking order, a silent, invisible hierarchy that isn't in Xi Jinping's favor. So those whose father fought in the Central Red Army looked down on those whose families joined local militia. So Xi Jinping's father, Xi Zhongxun, was in that category. He was from the bandit-filled hills of northern Shanxi. So to the princeling elite, that made him low tier. He's not considered pure blood. And then on top of that, military princelings always looked down on those in politics. And none of Xi Jinping's siblings served in the military. So when the generation came of age, the ones who went into business or joined the army looked down on the ones who went into politics. And Xi Jinping had no choice. He was at the bottom of that invisible chain of prestige. Now, to be fair, this hierarchy wasn't everything. In the end, people still judged each other by character. But Xi Jinping, being overly sensitive, timid, and deeply petty, felt it all, and it cut deep. So in a group that values competence, charisma, and relationships, Xi Jinping didn't do very well. He had none. His father was sidelined by Mao very early, so the family's influence was limited. He was awkward, inarticulate, not particularly good-looking, and worst of all, slow. So naturally, nobody wanted to spend time with him. That's within this princeling circle. Most of his princeling peers ignored him completely, and that kind of social isolation left scars. It wounded his fragile ego and distorted the way he saw the world, shaping the behavior that would later define his rule. Now, interestingly, the author points out that the trauma Xi Jinping endured during the Cultural Revolution wasn't a shadow that haunted him. It's quite the opposite. He seems to remember it as a happy time. According to the princeling, there were 3 distinct moments in his early life when he experienced what he considered joy. There were twisted moments when he felt like he could finally escape his inferiority complex and be in control. The first was during the Mao era. Mao was revered as a god. During the Red Guard years, Xi Jinping finally felt free. He was no longer mocked or looked down on. For once, he was spirited, unleashed, and accepted. His peers forgot how slow he was and treated him like one of them. And on top of that, he got to smash things, raid homes, and release his bottled-up frustration, all with official approval. That, to Xi, was the most liberating, joyful time of his life. And the second time was in Liangjiahe, the remote village in Shanxi where he was sent to be a laborer. So far from the elite kids who made him feel small, he found a different kind of recognition there. The peasants looked up to him because he was from Beijing. They respected him, and that admiration meant everything. That kind of validation made him feel powerful. Notice something else? Xi Jinping often mentioned his Liangjiahe experience, but he rarely talked about his time at Tsinghua University after Liangjiahe, the one period that should shine on his resume. He barely mentions his classmates in college, and he almost never talked about his college years. Why? Well, because deep down, he knows he wasn't particularly bright. And for him, college life was humiliating. So the third happy time came when Xi Jinping became the party secretary of Zhending County in Hebei. This was his first political post. Now, far from the elite circles that mocked him, Xi Jinping finally became the big boss. He was the center of attention, the most important person in the room. So even though the other princelings looked down on Xi, they still considered him one of them. Early on, they helped Xi Jinping eliminate political rivals. But the problem is Xi Jinping never returned the favor. He used the princelings, then tossed them aside. Why? Because deep down, he felt insecure and could still feel their contempt. And his hypersensitivity and pettiness cannot tolerate even the slightest hint of mockery. And the author puts it this way: if you can look at him the way a dog looks at its master, with total submission, then you're out. So that's what makes serving Xi Jinping so difficult. Anyone with a sense of dignity will eventually trigger his insecurities. And when someone suddenly gets purged, the author said, don't waste your time looking for a logical explanation because there is none. It's probably because they slipped up, maybe let a flicker of disrespect across their face. And that's why. So he said, Xi Jinping virtually has no real friends, and definitely none among the princelings. They all look down on him, and it doesn't matter how much power he gains. And that disdain never goes away, and Xi Jinping painfully knows it. That's why he really promotes princelings. And when he does, it never ends well. Just take a look at these three men, General Liu Yuan, Liu Yazhou, and Zhang Youxia, all princelings, all sidelined, or locked up, or fighting with him. And so he said in the beginning of Xi's political career, he had no grand ambitions. He was just trying to survive. Before he was crowned Emperor Xi, he had no real achievements to speak of. His only asset, which is admirable, is endurance. You have to give him credit for his ability to stay low-key and endure. He stayed out of trouble by staying out all the major factions. But he said not by strategy, but because no one wanted him. He was just too dim. Normally, a man like him would have capped out at a provincial position. But history sometimes turns on one word, however. Okay, so however, his rise was full of ironies. His mediocrity, his incompetence, his harmlessness, dopey vibe, he said, and his princeling background made him the perfect compromise among intense factional politics. Every faction thought they could control him. He was supposed to be a placeholder, but they were all wrong. He turned out to be the grave digger of the entire system. And now every faction regrets it deeply. No one imagined that this man, who isn't smart at all, would be the one to wipe them all out. But that's what he did. And the irony is, Xi Jinping doesn't even understand what he has destroyed. So the question is, how did he do it? Well, here's the weird part. The tricks he used were incredibly simple. That is, the trick he used is being direct, almost primitive. But that worked. Not because he's clever, but because everyone else in the system overthought it. Xi Jinping, in all his dullness, simply outpaced them by doing the obvious and by being direct, being ruthlessly direct. The princeling calls Xi Jinping living in a different dimension. He even jokingly said, smart people don't understand the mind of a fool who's amazingly simple but happy. That's what he said. So in factional politics, his simplicity worked because no one saw it coming. But in actual governance, Xi's simple approach has been a disaster. Wherever he points, chaos followed. Now, once Xi Jinping consolidated total power, his guiding emotion became revenge, especially against the princelings who once made him feel worthless. Other than princelings, there were two individuals in the world who can trigger Xi Jinping's sense of insecurity. Who are they? These two men. This is according to the princeling. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin both have absolute confidence that intimidates Xi Jinping. Trump's ego and commanding presence made Xi incredibly uncomfortable. In fact, there's a viral clip where Xi behaved like a student. This was from 2017 when Trump visited China, and this was in the Forbidden City. And Chinese said that this is the video that Xi behaved like a student and put his hands down when Trump took a glance at him. The video went viral in China actually after Trump returned to the White House. Now, as for Putin, Xi always felt like he was a step below, and Putin knew it. He never treated Xi Jinping as an equal, let alone a friend. But now that Putin is in a weaker position, he has no choice but to lean on Xi. He plays it nice, but it's just theater. And Xi Jinping loves that dynamic. That feeling of finally being in control and getting the respect, people say, or this princelings say, is one of the reasons he's willing to alienate the entire West just to stand beside Putin.